Introduction. Hello everybody, my name is Tom Timbrooks. I am running for Oregon's U.S. Congress, Congress in Washington D.C., Oregon's District 6 for the Republican ticket. And I've got a person in here we're going to be interviewing today. And you want to introduce yourself, sir?
Sure. I'm David Russ, known around Oregon Congressional District 6 as Russ is for us. I'm currently running for Newburgh School Board, but I am on the ticket for Oregon Congressional District 6 as well.
All right.
So, you know, I was the mayor of Dundee for 10 years. I've been a corporate executive. I've been on corporate boards. I've been board chairman of the board in many places. I've also set up and been on the board of nonprofit organizations, managed volunteers for over 20 years. So I just have a lot of experience going into this. And right now, I am the only conservative on the ballot for Newburgh School District.
It's about time.
And if I am elected, I will be the only conservative member on that board.
I think that's stuff we're gonna be discussing today is your old stance and everything. I got a slideshow. So here we go. We're going to start the slideshow. And this is you, David Russ, Oregon District 6 for 2026 School Board. And that's your website. Russ is for us, U.S. Okay, so first questions I got for you now for parental rights and local control. What role do you believe parents should play in determining school curricula and policies? Well, actually, if you'd like to tackle any of these, if you'd like to just read off one and tackle it,
Sure,
fine.
sure. I appreciate that because sometimes I'll get deep into a question and need to go back to what it was to make sure I've got the right details I'm answering with. You know, I believe parents should play a very large role in what is being taught in our schools.
Okay.
However, I do believe that having some input and guidance from, quote, what people would call experts, this is a questionable term nowadays, but guidance from them. So that we get the experts to provide what they believe is the right things, and then parents should be able to provide input on that, review what the ideas are, what their systems they're providing for, and provide input not only about whether that curriculum is appropriate, what depth it should be going to, and how maybe it should even be addressed. Because no one knows what their kids need better than parents.
And do you see that happening right now? Do you see any kind of way that you might correct that? You might make any changes?
Well, absolutely do not see that happening at the moment. Right now, Oregon and the Newburgh School Board both operate from the position of the government knows best. State of Oregon says, well, you know, the Federal Department of Education tells us what to do, and the Newburgh School Board says, well, the Oregon Department of Education tells us what to do. Our hands are tied. Now, you know, the truth is they don't have to be tied. These people are choosing that in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
You know, but also the truth is government doesn't know best. In fact, I think many of us will know of a known government situation, you know, an operating government type where your lowest level institutions are managed by bureaucrats who are loyal only to the top level government.
Right.
But that's not the way it's supposed to be in America.
Yeah, exactly. And this is one of the 5 principles that Republicans stand on is local decision making, whereas Democrats tend to go for centralized federal decision making. You know, Republicans are more about the local decision making because it just makes a lot more sense. It's fiscally responsible. It's faster, it's smarter, it's cheaper, safer, and if any changes need to be made, those changes can be made relatively quickly.
Exactly, and the way I look at it too is as a longtime CEO and COO, I would never walk onto my shop floor and tell a guy who's been running that machine for 20 years how he should do it.
Right, okay, yeah. Well, that makes perfect sense, man. So, how will you ensure transparency in what children are being taught, especially regarding sensitive topics like gender identity, race, and history? And I think the gender identity thing here, I mean, that's a big one. It seems so ridiculous. There was like a test someplace that these kids come home and tell their mom and dad, Mom, Dad, they had this questionnaire at school, and I didn't really want to answer it. I mean, you're asking like third graders and second graders, what gender do you identify as?
They don't even know what the word means.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, come on, man, this kid's eating boogers for lunch. He doesn't know what gender is like that. So, yeah, tell me, to go back, specify like gender identity, race, and history.
Well, you know, I believe you may want to cover the gender identity, race, history thing in a little bit more later on in this conversation. But this question really comes up to something that I may end up circling around to a few times in this conversation. I'm not enjoying this answer, and people may not enjoy the answer, but it's true. I can really do very little to ensure transparency if I'm elected. Because like I said, I will be the only conservative on that board. Now, while I cannot force the board to tell administration, staff, to be more transparent, I can take efforts, put out for, make things happen in board meetings to create that transparency.
Okay, all right.
So when, let's just say, as it comes up, something happens, the board is discussing, we will just adopt the state policies, which they probably have to do every year, I'd assume. And I will stop that point and say, wait, have you read section A, B, C, X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3 of the state policy, where it's talking about that you have to accommodate a 6-year-old saying that there's some other gender when they don't even know what that is. Well, so now I will ask in the meeting, what does that mean? So at the teacher level, if the teacher finds this information or extracts that information from a child, what will the teacher do? Okay, well, so just to go on with my scenario, they will send that child to the school counselor. What will the school counselor do? But let's go to the next step. Okay, so maybe the policy says that school counselor at that point will refer them to a doctor, which is, at my belief, is the wrong person to be talking to at that point. Not that doctors aren't great for good things, but we're talking psychological issues and things like that, not so much physical, I'm cut, I need stitches type of thing.
Right, exactly.
So then my next question would then be, okay, so what will this doctor say and do at that point? Because the bottom line is as a board member, we are responsible for what that doctor does. And if that doctor refers them to somebody, we're responsible to what that person does. We have to understand and accept what we are committing to put this child through every step of the way, and I will ask that board to openly state it in meetings.
And you know what? Here's the thing. Okay, I'm a manufacturing engineer, and the thing about engineering is we have something called root cause analysis, okay? And this is where you keep asking why, and it goes all the way back
the 5
to
whys.
the actual cause. Yeah, and as you know what I'm talking about with that, because you're in manufacturing and everything. So, and this is what you're talking about sounds kind of like root cause analysis. Here's a child that has a psychological problem, and you want that problem dealt with, but you want it dealt with by the people who have the expertise to deal with it. When you have a teacher in a classroom, that teacher's expertise is not dealing with gender identity issues. That teacher's expertise is in reading, writing, arithmetic, history, like that kind of stuff. So it's just like, teachers shouldn't have to do what is out of their expertise. Like that. I think that's kind of like what you're talking about.
Well, exactly. We wouldn't, back to the questions I would be asking, we wouldn't want the teacher to be taking actions, giving advice beyond their expertise. And on down the line, the counselor, the doctor, whoever.
Exactly. Because the teacher could be held liable.
Not only that, we want to double check because, if this doctor now tells the child, well, you need to go back and tell your parents that this has to happen or you're going to kill yourself. Well, clearly that's bad doctor advice. Now, maybe they would never admit that they would do that. Maybe they would never do that. We don't know, but the questions have to be asked.
Okay, yeah. So that sounds. Do you support a parent's right to opt their child out of certain lessons or materials? Why or why not? And I think this goes back to what you're talking about with parents having the right to make decisions for their children in the classroom.
Right. Well, so this is a tricky subject, and so many of the things are when we get into the school situation. We're talking about children and people's children. They feel strong about their children. They feel strong about what their children should or should not be taught. All the more reason why parents should be involved in those decisions. But I believe also part of the problems we face today are because certain lessons were not taught and because maybe people were able to opt out. Okay? So while every parent should be able to opt their child out of sexual education before age 12, I'm just throwing a number out, right? And that's going to vary depending on parents. No parent should be allowed to opt their child out of a civics class.
I agree. Yeah.
Or history. It's not about, that's not about a does my child need to be exposed to that or not yet. That is, for me, in some ways, a matter of national security.
Yeah, and I think, for civics, every child should learn about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, about, government, their job, what's the difference between Democrat and Republican, conservative and liberal, all that. And I mean, there are people now who are adults, they're functional adults. If you were to ask them questions about, I mean, just how many branches of government are there? They wouldn't. They say, there's the Second Amendment and stuff like that. I mean,
Oh yeah, well, there's lots of YouTube videos where you can see people being interviewed on the street. And how many states are there? Well, 837.
Yeah, exactly. Oh,
and being a politician, I'm constantly coming across people that are saying, well, that wasn't in the Constitution. In fact, just yesterday I had to say to somebody, well, gee, I don't know, have you ever bothered to read the Constitution? Because the 14th Amendment seems pretty clear. It says citizens. It doesn't say anybody on the whole planet.
Exactly.
And so this person was clearly just repeating something they had been told, God knows, by Whoopi Goldberg or something, and hadn't bothered to read the actual 14th Amendment before they said to me, oh, that's not in there. And so clearly, these people need a better education. We need to make sure that people understand how this country goes. Because the way this country was set up, with the people having control, with you having the freedom to do what you want to do with your life within the laws of the country, is partly why I attribute that to my being alive today. I really believe if I was in a seriously oppressed country, something would have happened before now that would have terminated my existence on this planet.
Yeah, I understand that, man. Yeah, and that's I mean, I remember having a conversation with a guy one time, and he's talking about how he said to me, "There's nowhere in the Constitution that says taxation is okay." And I said, "Wait a minute. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says Congress has the right to collect taxes, to collect taxes." I mean, and the guy just looks at me and is like, "When's the last time you read a book?" Like,
I love those comebacks.
yeah, it's, people like that just, I don't know, they get to me, man.
And the truth is we are currently kind of in violation of that today. Because while Congress may have instituted the tax as per Section 8, they are not doing the collection.
That is actually up to the executive branch, because
Right.
The executive branch enforces the laws, Congress creates the laws. Now, tax is a law. Okay, Congress creates this tax law, says these taxes must be collected, and so the executive branch is required to go out and collect the tax. And this is one of the things George Washington actually had to activate, like the National Guard, in order to go into certain places and collect taxes. And so, yeah, there's a historical precedent with that there. But, yeah, anyways, yeah, but you were absolutely right about civics. I mean, there's two things that I think were the most important things I learned when I was in high school. And I think the most important thing I learned in high school was typing. Being able to use a typewriter will get you into so many places. And the other one is just civics, just understanding, the value of voting, the importance of voting, the hierarchy of government and all this stuff. Fantastic. These are the things that, your very basic things in life you really need, But let's get back to here. Okay, my second question. Curriculum and educational priorities. What is your view on how American history should be taught, especially regarding the founding fathers of the Constitution and civics? And this is what we were just talking about. So, what do you
Well,
think?
I believe history should be taught basically from the documents that we have, not from some imagined history about something happened in 1619 that, before the country was built.
Yeah.
We have documents written by the people who actually created the Constitution
Right.
about their thoughts, feelings, arguments, ideas, things that people said against their ideas, all during the process of creating that document.
Yeah.
And that goes beyond just the words, but goes into the reason for the words. And, something that's really, truly amazing about the American Constitution is that they purposely tried to write it with as few words as possible. They did not want to create too many words and too many possibilities with too many phrases.
Yeah.
And this is really the problem we see with a lot of legislations written today. They go on and on and on, and they leave all kinds of openings for new interpretations of those different things. When you say in the Constitution something really simple like shall not be infringed,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean, well, maybe you could cut off a little of it over there, or you can do this. No, it means shall not. That's the end of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like which part, okay, with the Second Amendment, which part of shall not be infringed are you not getting, And there are some people who say, okay, well, you have the commas here. And these commas, they affect the actual structure of the sentence. It's like, okay, there is what the sentence says literally. There's the word of the law, and then there's the spirit of the law. Okay, and the Supreme Court's job is to interpret the Constitution according to the spirit of the law, and shall not be infringed is a very important part of that thing. And you would not believe how many people have no idea what the Second Amendment is. It's just
Well,
crazy.
and the one we're really facing today in a big way is that the president has full control over the executive.
Article 2.
People seem to think that, no, Congress can step in and tell the president what to do in the executive branch. It really doesn't work that way.
Yeah, especially with the guy that was deported to El Salvador. They're calling him the Maryland man, and it's like, how did he become the Maryland man? He's not even an American citizen, And they're talking about how Trump, what is it? He needs his due process. Okay, in 2019, he received a deportation order. And he was found, 2 separate judges found that he was a member of MS-13. And so he received due process in 2019. Why did it take 6 years to deport him? So, yeah, the executive branch, Joe Biden with the executive branch, the leader of the executive branch we had before Trump, not a strong leader, not a comprehensive, good, strong leader. And I think, a big part of, Trump coming in and actually enforcing the law, this is a big surprise to people who were accustomed to Joe Biden just kind of sitting around figuring out what flavor of ice cream he's going to have this afternoon, But anyways, I'm sorry, getting back to this. So you're saying the first part there, according to the actual documents and everything.
Well, yeah, and of course the civics is a huge thing. From federal all the way down to city level, that we need to be teaching our children how this government works so that we have trained individuals ready to manage it for the future.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so do you believe public schools should prioritize STEM education, trade readiness, classical liberal arts, and why? What should the school emphasize about that? What do you think?
Well, I believe the number one emphasis is kind of like what you said. Skills for life. Skills that will make you valuable to a new employer. Skills that might give you the ability to run your own business. But those include basic math, some basics about financial management, and a little bit of science goes a long way. I've been contemplating some things going on right now in high school sports and such. And people want to talk about, well, that hurt this person's feelings, or this person believes they're that, or whatever. But to me, the bottom line comes down to a simple high school level physics calculation that every American should know. And that is mass times speed, velocity squared.
Okay.
And every American should know that one because it ties back to the Second Amendment. But the truth is that when you have a teenage girl weighing, I don't know, let's just throw out 110 pounds,
All right.
moving at whatever, 10 miles an hour running, there's X amount of force that she will exert upon hitting something. When you have a teenage boy who weighs 170 pounds or 160 pounds doing that same 10 miles an hour running, the force is exponentially higher because of the way that calculation works.
Yep, greater the mass, the greater the force of
So,
impact, yeah.
and you know, without going into that side of the conversation at the moment, getting back to what people need to learn, so many people don't know that calculation and its meaning to them in their everyday lives that they really can't grasp on, well, why is it that a head-on collision with another car is so much more dangerous than a head-on collision with a wall?
Yeah. Yeah. Common sense, man, yeah. It's like,
And
but,
well, going back to
yeah.
the items with STEM and trade readiness, classical liberal arts, you know, I don't think prioritization on STEM is the best way to go because a lot of children have trouble grasping that.
Yeah.
I believe it should be made available, and it should be children who grasp that should have help in acceleration of their skills and learning in that area. I believe, yes, your common learning, just basic math and some basic, you know, physics things like E equals MC squared and how to manage your finances, even knowing physics and potentially a little bit of the workings of law. And not necessarily enough to become an attorney, but to understand that there's a petition and then there's motions, because every person is going to be involved in a legal action at some point in their life, even if it's only a ticket. My father was an attorney, and he felt one of the most important things he could teach me was the workings of law. And that has really served me well, not only in my own personal life, but in my workings as a CEO and CFO, COO, because companies constantly are dealing with this and that type of legal issue.
Yeah.
So these are the things they need to know. Liberal arts, it's good for the mind. It lets off steam, but in no way should be a priority. It should be absolutely available, but in no way should be a priority.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I remember what you were talking about with the whole legal system. I think the single most important part of the legal system that everybody should understand is the concept of reasonable person. Because pretty much every law that is written, the judge, you know, he's up there with his gavel and everything in his robes, he says, would a reasonable person think this? And that's the whole concept. Every law, I think, is written according to, would a reasonable person think this way? Yeah, and that is an important, and you're right. I mean, you don't have to pass the bar exam to understand the whole concept of legal and reasonable and everything. And what you're talking about with STEM there also, my nephews and my niece, they're all very, very intelligent people, and they did well with all the STEM stuff and like that. But when they got out of high school, I mean, my nephews, all of my nephews were doing college level calculus by the time they got out of high school. I was in my third year of college before I actually started doing college level calculus, you know, and it just kind of freaked me out. But I became an engineer, and each one of them is basically kind of a beach bum. They come up to me and they're like, you know, I don't know what I want to do with my life, and I don't know if I want to go to college. I said, well, you know, if you don't know that you want to go to college, don't go to college, because in 4 years you're going to graduate. You may have a degree you like, you may have a degree you don't like. You may know what you want to do, you may not know, but you're going to be about $200,000 in debt, and that's going to be a big problem, a big consideration.
Right. Well,
you know?
and not only that, there is a huge number of criteria and issues that lead to whether or not you will be able to use that degree once you graduate. is the market still want that degree? Is there just something that you put on your resume that triggers poorly with employers or something? You know, how many hundreds of other resumes are there, and did those people graduate from, I'm not going to name names, colleges that people believe are good?
Oh, yeah, okay.
You know, just there's so much. You know, I grew up in the Los Angeles area, and from this point, on this particular topic, that was really hard on my psyche. Because when I went out to look for work, I knew that there's probably 3,000 applications coming into any one of those jobs. You're here in McMinnville, you go to apply for a job, maybe there's 10 to 50 at the most. So the competition is much different, and you can feel a little more confident. I'm only fighting 10 to 50 people, not 3,000.
Well, so, back to this now. What's your position on critical race theory or any derivative ideologies being introduced in public schools? And I will tell you my philosophy on critical race theory. I don't think it belongs in any school in America. I think it's incredibly racist. I think it's vulgar. I think it goes completely against any constitutional principle that we hold dear in America. And, you know, I can't believe that there's even any conversation about whether or not critical race theory should actually be included in any curriculum. But, you know, I mean, hey, I'm gonna let you handle that because you're the one that's going for school, okay?
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, putting you on the spot a little bit there.
Well, you know, I agree with what you just said. Yes, this is in no way American, in no way compliant with American laws or the Constitution. The only reason it was allowed to get as far as it has at this point is because our institutions have been torn down and seriously, you know, attacked by communism since 1950 or earlier. Many people are not aware of a YouTube interview you can pull up with Yuri Bezmenov, who was a defector from Russia under communist rule. And he clearly stated what Russia's plan was to take over America. Now, he did this, I believe it was early 70s. And the door is almost completely closed on everything he has said by now. You can also go back to something from the 40s, I believe, 47-ish, where this list of 47 items is what communism has to do to America in order to take over. But don't worry, we're only about 75% through those items at this point. These things, this critical race theory, in fact, even just the whole pushing of race wars, so to speak, before critical race theory came out, and this going on, you know, through the 60s up through the 2000s, all this is about divide and conquer.
Yeah.
And so if someone can get us fighting each other, because we are the biggest, strongest, most powerful nation on the planet without an army, okay? We don't need an army because we already have almost as many guns as there are people in this country.
Oh yeah.
And based on the election numbers for Trump, at least 50% of those people are ready to stand up and protect this country with those guns any second.
Oh yeah, it's like the bumper sticker says, we have 300 million guns and like a couple billion rounds of ammunition. If we were the problem, you'd know it.
Absolutely, that is so true. Yeah. And so, you know, these programs, like I said, it's all about divide and conquer. In fact, you can go back to listen to most any speech Biden made during his tenure. Now, never before in the history of this country has a president stood up and cut down half of the country at least, calling them deplorable, saying his patience is worn out with them, saying that they're domestic terrorists. No president ever. And you know what? I believe this country has been more divided back like Civil War times. But even those presidents had the honor inside of them to not do that kind of thing. Because they knew if they divide this country, somebody will come from outside to attack us. They were much more focused on trying to make sure that we worked together and stayed together so that if we had attacks from outside, that we could sustain that and continue to be the greatest country on this planet.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Joe Biden's major concern during his presidency was seeing how many children he could sniff too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was like he's like, oh, I don't care about the Constitution. I want to sniff that little child over there. You know.
Right. Well, so this and the critical race theory is just a piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Destroying our educational system and then teaching false history about this country, all this sort of thing, it starts to destroy loyalty to the country. Now, people talk about nationalism being a good thing. Well, to me, I believe it's not a bad thing to be loyal to that which protects you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, sure, there's good and bad police, there's good and bad everything. There's good and bad apples in the tree growing in the yard.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that every one of them are bad. It doesn't mean the majority of them are bad.
Exactly. You just have to, and I think going back to one of the things that we could learn in high school is critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, critical thinking that's something I also learned in high school, and that's something growing up on a farm, like I did. I grew up on a little ranch. You know, I mean, you learn things, and you learn prioritization. You learn how to think critically.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I had two older brothers who they would pull every psychological game in the book to try to get my allowance from me and everything. So, I mean, I had to learn how to think critically. And this the critical race theory, I have actually studied into it, and it's just basically Marxism that is going under a different title. And I don't know if you've ever had an opportunity to read this book called White Fragility. Okay, White Fragility was created by this one female writer, and you know, I mean, I wanted to give it a chance. So I downloaded the audio book, and as far as I listened to it, it reminded me so much of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. I mean, it was just it was like she would tell a lie, and then build on that lie. And eventually you didn't even see the lie that the rest of this came from, and you know, you're thinking, wow. I mean, for somebody who does not have critical thinking skills, you know, this could lead them in a very bad, very dark direction where they might think, well, gosh, this is all true. Maybe I should go assassinate the president. You know, that kind of thing. And this is the danger of you know, teaching people stuff like that without you know, people who don't have critical thinking skills. You know.
Well, yeah, it's also first, I'll address one thing about it, that it was created originally actually as a legal defense. To say, oh, this person was so downtrodden and has been abused in their life. Well, they didn't know what they were doing, or they thought it was the right thing to commit this crime.
And this is critical race theory you're
right
about. Okay. Yeah.
And so that then it morphed more into a political thing and what to teach children and all that stuff. But that's where it really started was I believe at Yale.
Okay.
Yale Law as a defense that they could use to get people off the hook for things that they did. So that's one side of it. But the other thing is the whole critical race theory also is actually in a way tied into bringing 20 million people across our border that shouldn't be here without vetting them, bringing in terrorists and gang members, murderers, rapists, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Because if you look back through history, the history of communism specifically, they have always, first, you put down the beliefs of your existing people. Then you start to destroy, kill those people, jail those people, and you bring people in from somewhere else who were poor, downtrodden, starving where they were. And because you give them benefits, you give them jobs, you give them food, they become loyal to you as the leader.
Yeah.
Where your own patriots, they're loyal to their country. They're loyal to each other, not to the leader.
Right.
And that's the way our government was written. The American Constitution creates it so that the loyalties are to each other and to the nation, not to a leader.
Right, exactly. And I think what you're saying is critical race theory. Teaching critical race theory in high school, the presumption from the student, you've got these students there, And they don't have the skills necessary to understand that sometimes you're being taught an opinion. Okay, so these high school students come to school, they're exposed to critical race theory, and the presumption by them is that this is all fact. Okay, so if they don't have the faculty, if they don't have the capacity to examine
or background knowledge,
critically, then teaching them critical race theory in high school could turn them in a very dark, very bad direction, right? And I think, getting back to the question here, critical race theory or any derivative ideologies being introduced into public schools. So basically what you're saying about that is you're against that because in high school is the wrong time to expose people to this information. Is that what you're getting on there?
Well, yeah. And in fact, one way to put it is I believe in some ways that education up through 12th grade, high school, graduation, should be, for lack of other words at the moment, sterile.
Right.
Right? I don't give you an opinion, I give you facts. 2 + 2 is 4. 2 + 2 is not 5.
Exactly.
What you do with that later, figure it out. I'm not going to tell you it's good, I'm not going to tell you it's bad, I'm going to tell you it is. And that's what it is. We have these documents from our founding fathers that say this is what our government is, they all voted on it, they agreed on it, and we also have these documents that say this is what we were thinking when we did it. I'm not going to tell you that's good, I'm not going to tell you that's bad, I'm going to tell you it is. And that's the way education, at least through 12th grade, should be, sterile. I also believe in the classroom, in college, it should be sterile. Conversation can be open, talk about whatever you want outside the classroom, unless of course it's a philosophy class. But honestly, if we're talking about math, 2 + 2 is still 4. If we're talking about calculus, and a sine wave is still a sine wave. If we're talking about, all these things, they're still facts. And these are the things we need people to be filled up with those facts so that once they step out of these educational institutions, then they can be the great philosophers we need to drive our nation forward.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that sounds good. Yeah. So let's go next slide here. How do you plan to ensure that taxpayer money is being used efficiently and responsibly in the school system? And this is something, I was over at a restaurant today, I told somebody I was running for Congress. The guy says to me, why is it we keep piling more money into the government for education and our kids keep getting dumber? And I told him straight across, the Department of Education at the federal level, when your money gets to that level, you have no idea what happens to it, right? So when it gets to that level, it's just a big slush fund for whoever wants to use it. And what people have found out recently is about 6% of all that money actually goes to the educational system. And the rest of it is for paid political platforms, And so, yeah, I am in favor of President Trump dismantling the Department of Education at the federal level. I think it should happen at the local level because we know, like you said before, we know what the children want. And if we're going to pay that money into the government, I would prefer that money go to infrastructure or paying off the national debt. So, I'm sorry, now I took that away, but taxpayer money is being used efficiently and responsibly in the school system. How do you plan to ensure that? Okay?
Well, first of all, I'll address partly what you said, that what you said about money in the federal government, that's every area of the federal government today.
Oh
and so it's more of a symptom than the problem. The problem when we're talking about how money is being spent or even what that money is being spent on at the federal level, it has to do with the philosophy of what's going on there and the fact that the Federal Department of Education is being managed by uncontrolled bureaucrats, right? So we don't say what they're supposed to do. In fact, Congress doesn't even say what they're supposed to do. They appoint these people and let them run wild.
Yeah.
And then when we complain, they're like, "Shut up, you're stupid. Don't bother us." A lot of that's happening right now at the school board. So again, circling back to what I said in the beginning, being the sole conservative on this board, there's going to be very little I can do. And I'm sure that my associates on the board will follow the philosophy that I heard in my first city council budget meeting, which was, well, this is the general fund, and most of that you really can't do anything with. Like, really? I thought we were in charge of that budget, right?
Yeah, I thought general fund meant general, use
Well,
it for general purposes, yeah.
Of course, being a businessman, I recognize certain things you can't change, okay? Insurance costs what it costs. I can't change that budget line item, right? We can search for a better price, but if it's $10,000, I can't say spend 5. It doesn't work that way,
Right.
okay? But there are other things, and some things that just really upset me that I know I can't change either, and one of those is PERS. This state and its retirement system is just ridiculous and ripping off the people like mad to pay these bureaucrats who have been ripping us off their whole lives more money when they retire. You know, it's really ridiculous. There's a guy right now getting like $40,000 a month on PERS.
That's crazy.
Yep, and not only is he retired though, now he's a consultant at a hospital in Seattle. Probably making several $100,000 a year on top of his $40,000 a month. Well, sure, maybe he deserves that. He got the education, he did the work, but it just sounds dumb to me. So
what would you do as a member of the school
well,
board do?
again, I try to call things out. Now, and in fact, I did a couple of Facebook posts about the current budget. I went to their budget meeting and I reviewed things, and there's definitely some issues with the budget as it is. And more of those issues had to do with the way the board and staff are looking at it. And
Sorry about that.
yeah, unfortunately, there's no way that I can make those changes. I see that like one way that they dance around with certain laws, like there's a law that says you cannot change the amount spent on any item that alters the fund budget by more than 10% without having a whole new public hearing. It's Oregon law.
Yeah.
Well, there's a little bit of relativity, but the bottom line being is that by splitting this thing up so that every school is a fund, and then every type of teaching is a fund within that fund, so that if we say we're going to have $0 put out for substitutes, which is what they've done in this latest budget. No money on the whole budget for substitutes. I don't know how that works. But if we say there's no money for substitutes and then we have to hire one, well, that only goes in the one line item for math in Mabel Rush at 5th grade.
Yeah.
And so the number becomes so small that it doesn't adjust the budget by 10%, and they've dodged the law. And the line items, it's ridiculous. And I don't know how to bring back more responsibility other than turning people's eyes toward this kind of thing. The biggest issue I saw with the Newburgh school budget as it's written is the budget document presented to the budget committee does not have a current year actual spent nor a current year proposed close. Well, if you don't know those numbers, how do you possibly project what you're going to do next year?
Okay.
They have 23-24 closing numbers. They have 24-25 budget, but no numbers regarding anything spent for 24-25. So again, having been a CEO, CFO, I'm like, how could I even start to think about creating a budget with this?
So basically what you're saying is transparency, budgeting, and planning.
Right. So, in the end, all I can do is call these things out, hopefully get parents' eyes on it, constituents' eyes on it, and then get them to make a ruckus more.
So being a conservative in the board, you're going to be able to bring these things to people's attention that weren't brought before.
Right. Well, so I am supposed to, now of course I've heard this doesn't always happen, right? I'm supposed to be able to have a voice and use that voice in the meetings.
Right.
Okay, and I have seen videos and heard stories about people, board members, being squelched in board meetings. So that's fine too. But I will then step out of that meeting and give a full report to anybody who's ready to see that report. If we go into a work session, which most people don't go to work sessions because they can be long and boring, and you have no opportunity for input.
Yeah.
But I'll come out of that work session and say, these were the things discussed. These were the things people said. What do you think? You know, you want to ask this question, this question, this question? You know, like I want to start asking people, do you want the mass of a teenage boy charging your teenage girl at home plate?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want the mass of a teenage boy skirmishing with your teenage girl on a rugby field?
Yeah.
Rugby's dangerous enough for the girls without boys present.
Mm-hmm.
And the best one is, do you want the mass of a teenage boy approaching your teenage girl in a locker room?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly, man. I know where you're going there, man. Keep the boys and the girls apart. It's I mean, girls sports, guys sports, and everything. Yeah, but yeah, I know where you're going there, man. I know where you're going there. So I apologize, man. These allergies are killing me. I gotta. Would you support an audit of the district's spending and contracts? And you just kind of went over that. It sounds like you would definitely support that.
Absolutely. You know, supporting an audit ties back to something that I believe we have problems with on a national scale that I just have trouble understanding that people don't get, okay? To me, only criminals hide evidence, right? And yet, we've had Democrats in this country at all levels, from city all the way up to presidential level, saying, you don't deserve to see that evidence. Nobody needs to see that evidence.
Yeah.
And this goes back to an audit. Anybody who fights against an audit seems to have something to hide to me.
Yeah, exactly. That's so you'd be kind of like heading up the Doge committee for the school board.
Well, as I said, I'll be able to say, yeah, we need to audit this, and they'll all go, oh, you're dumb, we all going to vote against you, and they will. But at least I said it in public.
No, that's good. Yeah. So providing transparency, lending credibility, and accountability to the whole system.
And if I see something that appears to be not correct, and I call it out, and look, this seemed to happen in the budget, that tells me I think we need an audit, right? And if they argue with me, we all know who they are. It's just becomes very clear at that point.
Okay. Yeah. That sounds pretty clear, man. Okay. Are there areas where you believe the school budget could be trimmed or redirected to better serve core academic goals?
Well, absolutely. You know, while, in fact, looking through the Newburgh budget recently, I found that they completely cut off any money for dropout recovery. They've dropped any kind of, or really severely cut money for community engagement. In fact, they dropped all funding for their public information system, 100% of it. So while doing that at the same time, they've continued to increase their funding for Everybody Belongs, right? Well, Everybody Belongs is not something that needs a program. It's something that needs, for lack of other way to put it, discipline, right? If you can't be nice to that person next to you, then we need to do something with you, right? Now, that doesn't mean that I have to allow that person to come into my classroom and change all the rules, or it has to be acceptable for that person to come into the classroom and change what all the rest of the students have known and dealt with throughout their whole school career. That's wrong, doing that for one person. That is not being welcoming, that's being controlled. So, and this, I recently came across this, where people talking about this welcome. Everybody's welcome is one of the things that they like to push. And I believe, yes, everybody should be welcome, at least until they've proven themselves not worthy of being welcome. Because sure, I can be nice and say, hey, yeah, you're welcome in my community to whoever, but as soon as they go and hold somebody up at gunpoint or rape somebody, they're no longer welcome in my community. I don't care.
Yeah, and this is the whole thing with Mark Rubio, what he's talking about with student, these student visas and everything. These students come to America and they say, hey, I'm in America, the First Amendment and everything. And you know what? Yeah, the Constitution does apply to you, but understand, you're still a guest in America. If you do things that, Americans, a reasonable person would feel violates another person's constitutional rights, like I saw some protest, Free Palestine protest on the campus, I think it was Yale or Purdue or something like that. And they're actually, this is a very anti-Semitic kind of protest. And, these people are doing all kinds of things. I think that violates that person's rights. He or she has a right to, worship whatever religion they want, right? And and so, if you're going to violate that person's constitutional rights, you don't belong in America. And I think that's what you're kind of talking about there, isn't it?
Right. That so much of these programs that they're implementing in trying to, where they're claiming that they're making it more welcoming, is actually suppressing the rights of other students and other citizens.
Yeah, and this is something that's kind of going on in England. England is actually, they're enforcing all kinds of censorship laws.
Oh yeah.
Because they're like, oh, well, your opinion is offending somebody. Well, yeah, I have the right to an opinion. Well, if it offends somebody else, we're going to arrest you. Mm-hmm. Wait a minute, you got rapists and murderers that you're letting out of jail, and you're gonna arrest me because I had an opinion on Facebook.
Right. If you had your own personal diary in England that you never shared with another soul on this planet ever, and for some reason they decided they needed to search your home, and I don't care why, you may have committed a crime, and they find this diary and open it up, and they find it says something in this diary they believe is offensive, you are now guilty of a hate crime.
Yeah.
Even though you never voiced that to anybody, nobody ever saw it till they opened it, you're guilty of a hate crime. And to me, we're talking about thought crimes now. And that's what they're doing there. They're actually going into people's homes and arresting them for things that someone looked through their window and saw a picture of an American flag, or I don't know, whatever it is, right? But if someone can look through your window and see something they believe is offensive, which is kind of being a peeping Tom, then you could be arrested for it.
Yeah. Now, I like the hat that Elon Musk had. He said, his hat said, "Make 1984 science fiction again."
Yeah, that's
George Orwell. I mean, George Orwell came out and said all this stuff. And it's happening right now. Dominoes are falling. But that's England. This is America. We're talking about America. And we're talking about better serve core academic goals. I think we got a little bit off the subject there.
Well, so my point really being that I believe in some ways community engagement, public information, these things serve academic goals, little indirectly, but they serve them much more than trying to teach this everybody needs to be welcome.
Yeah. And I think the whole everybody needs to be welcome thing is sort of setting up people who actually have opinions to be singled out and ridiculed. You know?
Right. I take it to a different place. Up until this exact point in time in history, that stuff was taught in the house. You were taught to say yes, sir, yes, ma'am, or you got slapped on the back of the head, right?
Yeah.
And if you didn't learn that and use it when you grew up, you suffered socially, you suffered in your career. You were paid back for your lack of respect in the way that the world treated you. Well, so now they're trying to teach people you need to be different than what your parents ever would have taught you. And in fact, they set up systems to reward that. And we're starting to tear those down today. And really great thing. We may get back to what America's supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, people will look and say like, oh, well, look what your parents taught you, and they taught you, and it goes back to like a long time ago and everything. Seriously, people have to understand that a big part of education happens in the home, and that is respect and discipline and critical thinking and things like that. And it is a parent's job. This goes back to what you were talking about, first. mom and dad do have to take part in the educational process, and generally a big part of that, what they do for the educational process is they teach respect for the teaching system, respect for the elders, respect for leaders, and so forth. And I think, that's something that kind of been lost. It's kind of like when we make fun of somebody, or like Elon Musk. People say, he's the world's richest person. It's like, okay, is that supposed to be a bad thing? Is that supposed to make him bad or evil or something like that? I don't understand how it's okay. Yeah, he's the world's richest person. So yeah, I like that. But
the truth is, it may or may not make him bad, but we're not in a place to tell for sure.
Yeah, exactly. It just makes him the world's richest person. If he has an opinion or an agenda or something like that made his agenda wrong or anything,
Gives him a bigger platform.
Yeah, exactly. And when like kids come to school and it's like, well, where'd you learn that? Well, my mom and dad taught me. The teachers are instinctively going to be like, oh, well, are you? Anyways, it's really easy to get off the track here. We've been here for almost an hour anyway, so wow. We're going to see how much longer you want to stay here, because we got the studio.
I think we're wrapping up on your questions before long.
School safety and discipline. What are your thoughts on the current discipline policies? Do you believe schools are doing enough to maintain order and safety? What do you think on that?
I believe there's a slight difference between those two questions.
Okay.
But initially, let me address the discipline thing. I've been reviewing the school board policies. Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, and it makes sense, there's no matrix that says, well, if this happens, you do this, right? This doesn't happen that way. The only policy that really exists regarding discipline is what can constitute the requirement for a suspension or expulsion.
All right.
Below that, it's all kind of Wild West. Mm-hmm. And I believe a little bit more specifics would help, but sometimes you do have to take it by case, because one other policy they have that makes sense is that in the case of a special needs child, the discipline needs to be something that they are capable of understanding and incorporating.
All right.
But sometimes to try and take that to every single child in the whole school system is beyond what any person can really calculate and do right anyway. Mm-hmm. So that at that point, maybe some matrix is better. This is what our court systems are supposed to operate on, right? Mm-hmm. If you do armed robbery, you get no less than 2 years. Can't have probation for at least 6 months. Of course, that's all changed with as many people as they throw in jail nowadays. But the bottom line being is the judges are supposed to have that type of a matrix that they actually decide what the punishments should be. Right. It wouldn't hurt on some level for that to be consistent in the school system. And it wasn't. It hasn't been. I remember as a child, people always complained, well, this guy only got that and I got this, and that kind of thing. So a little bit more consistency would be right, but I don't believe that they have a policy that can be addressed, attacked, stated upon, or anything else. And so much of it, in the end, really depends on the teacher, because majority of the discipline is going to initiate, be required as a result of, or whatever in the classroom.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so the teacher is the first one to see it, address it, make a decision regarding it, whether they're going to report it, whether they need to get that person out for safety, whether they're going to send them to the office, whatever it is. That first decision, which can be a huge factor in the whole process. Mm-hmm. And especially how they address it, because they should be addressing, especially if it's a child in their classroom, they should be addressing that child in the best way possible for that child. Mm-hmm. And they should know, because that child's in their classroom day after day. They should have a better idea of how to address the issue, And I believe some of them nowadays, based on training and things they were taught, critical race theory and all that, they will treat children differently in the classroom, which is absolutely wrong.
Yeah. Okay, so that's basically what you're saying about the difference between discipline and maintaining order.
Yeah, order and safety, those go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And I believe those need to be addressed more specifically and on kind of a group level. Going on to the next question you have there about school resource officers, which, it's another one of those
resource officers on it.
Yeah,
Oh,
one of
getting ahead
those,
me. All right,
one of
yeah.
those dumbed down and non-specific terms that we've acquired in the new speak of today.
Yeah.
These are police officers, and I believe it's a good thing. I believe that having actual armed security at school is important. No student, no teacher, no parent has ever been harmed on a school campus by armed security of the campus. It doesn't happen that way. And if it does, then those people should be sent to the death penalty as far as I'm concerned. If you got that job and then you did that, right out.
Yeah.
But the thing is we know that most criminals are cowards.
Okay.
Probably 99.9 type thing, are cowards. If they believe there's any chance that they could get caught or even confronted in the committing of their crime, they won't do it.
Yeah.
That they look for houses that are empty to break into.
Yeah.
They, if they know that there is someone armed and ready to defend at a school, they will not go to that school.
Yeah.
We've seen in the latest years all these, gun violence things that everybody wants to whine and cry about. All of them happened in gun-free zones.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can tell you for sure, when I go to the Yamhill County Republicans meeting, there's no whack job going to walk in there and try to shoot people.
Yeah.
There's no less than 10 or 15 guns in that meeting. And I think I'm going short.
Yeah, you know what? I have never actually. I've got a concealed carry permit, but I've never actually carried my gun into the meeting. I've never figured there'd be a reason to. But yeah, I'm willing to bet there's a few people in that meeting that are they got guns. I know I keep one in my pickup truck.
Right. See, I have a philosophy that that's a bad place for it.
Yeah.
Because vehicles get broken into, vehicles get stolen. The only time my firearm is outside of my possession is when it's locked up somewhere in my house. If I take it out, it stays with me. I mean, I have had to and very grudgingly left it in a vehicle. But to me, that is very stressful because someone could just randomly choose to steal my car and then take my gun and go use it for something. I don't like that idea at all.
Yeah, because apparently if you have a gun and it gets stolen and used in a crime, you are liable for some reason for that crime that happened. And yeah, I've never really understood that, but...
kind of like the gun is responsible for the killer's actions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, crazy. All right, but anyways, how would you address concerns about bullying or classroom disruption that interferes with learning?
Well, again, there's very little I can do as a conservative, the only conservative on the board. These people on the board, though, they claim to be concerned about bullying. Now, of course, they are only concerned about the bullying they don't like, because they are all more than happy to bully some child into using correct pronouns.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Bully some child into saying things they do not believe, which is if they don't believe that someone is what they say they are, you have in this country the right to say, I do not believe what they say they are, and I will state openly what I believe they are, and that you are protected by your First Amendment rights to do so.
Yeah. So what you're saying basically is, okay, if somebody comes up to you and says, you will refer to me as this, that, and the other, and you will treat me as this, that, and the other, in spite of the fact that I am not this, that, or the other. That in itself is bullying. Because what a person is doing is they are taking a policy that is meant to, protect these people, and they're using that policy to actually bully somebody for absolutely no reason. So the person who's being bullied is going to have to react to that and say, well, I don't believe you're this, that, or the other, so I'm not going to refer to you as this, that, or the other. And, sorry if that offends you, but, reality has to play a part here someplace.
Right. Another little quip is I heard a story once about a mayor was elected to a city. And after he was elected, his wife came in and was talking to staff. Says to staff, you may call me Madam Mayor. And staff's response was, okay, Kate.
Okay.
And that's all perfectly legal. There's no reason why anybody should have a problem with that. I believe the person saying, "You may call me Madam Mayor," was trying to get something, some sort of power out of saying that, by trying to get this person to feel that they had more power by asking them to say those words, which is really what's going on, is that the whole newspeak thing, by changing our language, demanding that we use different words, they are trying to both control the narrative and our minds.
Yeah. Yeah. So getting back to this though, about the bullying thing, I guess.
Well, so yeah, I mean, like I said, that bullying is a problem, but generally bullying is more about treating someone poorly because you have an advantage over them and trying to take something from them through this process.
Yeah.
And it could be just taking their dignity from them.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be money, which often it is, or anything else, their books, their tennis shoes. But it generally, it's anywhere from taking their dignity from them to taking actual physical things from them. And I think that we need to focus on those things and stop people from treating others poorly in that way. But to call it bullying, when this city staff member said, "Okay, Kate, that's not bullying. That's standing up for yourself." And this is where they're trying to take it. Again, trying to convert the term bullying to mean, well, you didn't use my proper pronouns.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry. You can say your name's Bob and I'll call you Jack, and I still don't care.
Yeah. So basically, kind of what you're saying is evaluate the bullying session. Because I can tell you, when I was growing up, if I was to come, oh man, this one time, man, there were some kids down the block, and they jumped on me, beat me up a little bit, and I made it home. And come in the house, and I was a little kid. I think I was like in the 3rd grade or something like that, right? And I was crying and everything. I said, "Mom, kids beat me up." My mom just turned around. She slapped me across the face. I guess she was just disgusted because it's like, my son is a little whiny. I'm just bam, just smack me right across the face, right? Mm-hmm. That's where I learned really quickly. Mom has her own problems. If you're being bullied, it's up to you to figure out what to do about it. Now, the unfortunate reality with the whole bullying situation is there are some children out there who don't realize that the cure for bullying is to strengthen yourself up, learn how to stand up for yourself, learn how to fight, essentially learn how to face the world the way an adult would face the world. Okay? Mm-hmm. They don't understand that. They're going to grab their dad's pistol and come to school and start shooting the place up. And I think that's where we get the concern for bullying is, what's going to happen if these kids are bullied, are they going to come shoot up the school? And I don't know. Do you suppose that's something that a school board person could work to try to figure out?
Potentially, but first and foremost, that little process of logic you ran through is a violation of all quality control that I've ever dealt with.
Yeah.
Okay? It's just choosing that because something happened, this person shot up the school, that it must be related to they got beat up.
Yeah, yeah.
To me, it shows a greater psychological issue that may or may not have existed with or without the beating.
Right, yeah.
And we need to address that.
Yeah, okay.
You can't go ahead and attack the bullying and think you've solved the issue. They could be getting bullied because they act in weak ways because of things that they were not taught properly in their home.
Right.
Now, we can't control all that, but if you attack the symptom rather than the cause, or things that you actually have a capacity to attack that could prevent it, you're not going to stop the problem. You're going to perpetuate it.
Okay, so what you're saying is you're going to go back to the root cause analysis, find out, okay, why is this person being bullied? Is this actual bullying? You're going to analyze the whole situation and say, well, is this guy actually being bullied? Is it something?
Right.
Something
Well, in a way, yeah.
like that?
I mean, So when you look at this, there's several issues that need to be considered. Look at the bully. They also have a psychological issue, okay? So those things need to be addressed. And we can't, as school board or even teachers, that type of thing, it's very hard for someone to step into the home and say, well, what are you doing wrong that's causing your child to be a bully? But if we can figure out some ways of what leads to that, we can try to alter the way we address it as a society. Right? Because right now we say, okay, well, if someone is beating their child, clearly they're not a good parent, we can pull the child from them. But what other things? What is, where does psychological abuse come in and all this? And that's a very tricky and slippery slope, because we see now today where CPS is a big dangerous monster killing families, not so much protecting children anymore. So it's a really tricky, dangerous place to be. On the other side of it, there is also the child that's getting bullied. They put out an air that makes the bully feel like they can do this. Right? Going back to the whole school resource officer type of thing, that if that child had put off an air to begin with of, I will not tolerate this, the bully wouldn't have come, ever.
Right.
So, there's certain things that we've done as a society that's caused us to go soft and caused us to actually create these problems for ourselves. That, back, in the older days, I mean, just as simple as child comes walking home from school and he's just got his head down and dad sees him walking up the long driveway, because it's a big property, just the whole time. He said, what's wrong with you, boy? Hold your head up. Right? Has nothing to do with, I don't care what you had in school. I don't care if you had a bully. This is the way you need to handle yourself, the way you should hold yourself in front of others. And nowadays it's like, whoa, no, that's terrible abuse. How could you talk to your child that way? Well, the thing is if you're not teaching them to hold themselves properly in society, they will not only fail to act right as a society, they will be treated differently in society because of it. And all this just ends up tearing the whole situation down. So we need to look at what we've done as a society that caused these things. Attacking the bully or trying to protect the bullied child, these are attacking the symptoms and not solving the problem.
Right. So basically, it's, root cause analysis, find out what the actual problem is. Don't treat the symptoms, treat the problem.
Right. I believe, put it in a really easy nutshell, we need to get back to teaching our children to be strong. And, I could go deeper into that, but the statement ends really right there. Teach our children to be strong. Because if they had strong parents, the bully would feel enough they'd feel good enough about themselves that they don't have to bully somebody to feel better. And the bullied child would project an air of confidence in a way that the bully wouldn't want to approach. If these children were raised to be strong, 90% of the problem would be gone right there. Now there's psychosis, and we will never escape that. The human mind is a crazy, wild, terrible thing, can be dangerous, and takes us to places we don't always understand. Takes other people to places we will never understand. But when you look at anybody committing a mass murder or seeking to damage others just for the sake of damaging others, clearly there's a psychological issue there. And to me, it doesn't matter if mommy was bad. We need to get this person away from society to protect everybody, including them.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. So let's see if see how many more of these slides we got, because we're on an hour and 15.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, you went a while, though. Some of these things kind of crossed over on each other. So,
let's see. How about school choice and competition? I think,
I like that one.
A couple more,
Well, so school choice, I believe, is both good and bad for public schools, and that's basically a good thing. I believe in free market. I believe that the free market will regulate itself if allowed to. So many people want to put down, the American experiment in free market failed. Capitalism is failed. And we can see this all around us. Well, the truth is I cannot tell you for sure that we were ever a 100% free market or that we ever operated a 100% capitalist economy.
Yeah, and this is something I've talked about in some of my other things, is a lot of times people conflate social programs with socialism. As social programs exist, because the whole function of any government is to accomplish collectively that which can't be accomplished by the individual. And no individual person can bring the education to everybody, right? So that requires a social program. But just because the government has a social program, that doesn't mean that the government is socialist. I mean, people will point at Scandinavia and say, well, Scandinavia is socialist. It's like, no, they are not. They're a free market economy. They have social programs, but not socialism. See, and I think
Right.
that's what you're
Right.
talking about there.
So if we really open up the market completely the way it should be for private schools, school choice, yes, this will create a huge issue both in attendance and finance for the public schools. But they brought that on themselves. It's just like, if I make widgets and I get my widgets made in China and they make it out of subpar materials, their quality control sucks, right? But I got widgets, buy them, right?
All right.
And if I'm the only person on the market, I sell billions of widgets. It's awesome. Then comes Tommy. Tommy's like, I want to make a better widget. I'm going to make it high quality. I'm going to treat the people who make it right. It may cost a little more, but people will get what they deserve.
Right.
And all of a sudden, let's say Tommy does that. Everybody starts buying his widgets. I go dead, just like that. That was my fault, not the market's fault.
Right.
I chose to try to rip people off for my own profit, not provide a quality good at a good price. And the market will determine that. Now, later on, we will find that Tommy will keep raising prices, supply and demand hit him, and he has to raise his price because he's not getting enough stuff, he can't put out enough, and he raises his price. Well, so then people might turn around and start coming back to my cheap widgets, right? And they'll buy some, I may never get the market share I had, and maybe somebody in the middle pop up, and they don't go super high quality, but they stomp us both because of the price point that they can have.
Right.
This is the market. And did I deserve to hit the high point? Maybe, maybe not. Does I deserve to be crashed? Maybe, maybe not. But that's not the question. The question is, are people getting the quality they deserve for what they're paying for?
Yeah.
And so in the end, the people decide they like the middle point, and they buy from that person, and the other ones, do or don't survive, whatever.
Right. And so that relates to the school board.
It goes,
the
yeah,
question here, the position of school choice initiatives like charter schools, vouchers. So what you're saying is it's really a question of quality of education, right?
Right, and the thing is when you have a monopoly where the public education is the only choice.
Yeah, like the government has a monopoly because of the social.
Good or bad, that's what you get.
Right.
And then, in fact, if it's really bad and they're destroying your child, too bad, you still got to send them anyway.
Yeah.
And that's not only not free market, it's not American, and it's a usurping of parents' rights.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and you're still, I don't even have any kids, and my property taxes go to pay for, school and everything. So, I don't really mind it because what it does, if you have a really good school system, even if you don't have children, the value of your house goes up. So the resale value of your house going up is really where you collect the benefits of having a good school system, access to a good school system.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I take it to another place, which is if you have a good school system, then you have better quality people graduating from that system, which improves your community and your life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Private, let's go to governance and community engagement. How will you ensure that community voices, especially parents, are heard and respected at school board meetings?
I wish. I honestly have very little faith that I will be able to get the existing board to really allow, listen to, and consider voices of the community and the parents.
But I mean, you are going to do something to try. I mean,
Right.
you can't really just go in and say like, well, I'm going to lose. I'm going to lose anyway, so I'm not going to do anything. You're going to go in there with an attitude where, you know, I may lose, but there's going to be change, right?
Well, there's going to be change, I hope, in that parents will have the opportunity to hear what I'm saying and get involved. That even if those parents are not allowed to speak in a meeting, that I will put myself in a position where they can reach out to me, and then I can use the voice that the law says I am supposed to be able to be given in those meetings to speak for them.
Okay, all right. So it's, you know, what would you do if you found yourself in the minority on a controversial issue? Would you still advocate for your principles? And I think this is something that you've been talking about, you know, alluding to, is that you are going to be the minority.
Right.
So what are you going to do as the minority person? You know you're going to be the minority. What exactly are you going to do to make sure that you know the public, whoever's paying for you to be there, is going to get their money's worth? I don't know. Is this a paying gig?
No.
It's not. Oh, okay. So
And neither was Mayor of Dundee for 10 years.
Oh yeah.
Most people don't know that.
Wow.
You know, I must be committed to serving because I keep doing this for free. But, you know, as I've said, I really don't have much hope that I will change those people on that board. I do hope that I will speak my mind, or really get them to expose the facts of what they're doing. To me, of course, anybody who knows me, who's seen me speak before, who's been following my campaigns, knows that I'm not afraid to speak my mind. However, there's time and place for things. And I believe that in these school board meetings, standing up for my principles, actually speaking that way in the meeting, is counterproductive. It will just make them attack me, go off subject, call me racist, all these things that are not relative to the business of a school board. I want to stay focused on that.
Right.
And that's why I'm choosing to take things in a much more scientific, quality assurance, common sense kind of approach, in that, okay, these are the results of your policy. Is that what you're looking for? Your policy will cause this and this and this, right? That, going back to E equals MC squared, right?
Yeah.
I don't have to talk about, oh, that child will feel hurt if you don't let them beat up on the girls, because everybody wants to jump on your head and argue and call you names when you say that kind of thing. But who can argue with E equals MC squared?
Nobody.
And this is where I intend to take the conversation to reality in every step of the way.
Yeah, I think this is something I discussed in one of my previous presentations here, is that human beings are emotional creatures that think logically. And the best way for any kind of real progress to be made is to have an argument from a logical point of view. Okay? Now, of course, humans being the emotional creatures that we aren't just going to want logic. We are going to want, you know, yeah, it's logical, but it's pretty, okay? And this is where, in between the logical mind and the emotional mind, is the wise mind. And I tell people, stay away from the emotional, stay away from too much logical, because too much logic, too much emotion, those can cloud your judgment. But if you go by what the wise mind says, you know, the wise mind will lead you much better than either the emotional or the logical mind there. And what you're going on with, it sounds to me like, what would the wise mind say? What would the wise mind do? Well, the wise mind would realize that an emotional argument might give you an emotional answer, and you might feel emotionally this way today, but not tomorrow or next week. A logical answer with a logical argument it'll be the same answer today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. I don't know, am I
Right.
kind of getting on that?
These are the things that so many people have turned away from in today's society. In fact, that this again, going back to, if you look at what is happening in this country today compared to what historically happened in other countries under different types of political regimes, that partly they want to destroy that logical thinking so that it can be replaced with, well, this is what happens. Right. And it's not true. But the truth is they've been putting in so long, teaching our children that 2 + 2 is 5 type of thing, rather than just, these are the facts, oh no, I believe if you say 2 + 2 is 4, that's racist. In fact, they got this whole thing going on right now that accurate math is racist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's something else I was discussing today at the little breakfast place I was at. One of the reasons that our educational system is failing us is because teachers, principals, the whole establishment has been taught, well, math is racist, history is racist, teaching good grammar is racist, all this stuff. And it's like, these are people, they want to keep their jobs, and this stuff doesn't really make a lot of sense to them, but if the policies change, they really don't have any choice. They have to obey the policies, right? So I think what you're saying is ultimately the teachers want to obey the policies. They want to give children a good education and everything, but they have to keep their jobs, right?
Well, I think that's true for a lot of teachers. I think also true for a lot of teachers is they've been indoctrinated and they believe those things, and they want to teach things those way. So we have this duality of an issue, and we have to get into it and figure it out, and remove the people who want to teach in a subjective manner. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I believe the entire educational system should be sterile. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Philosophical conversation should be limited to philosophy classes and out in the quad at lunch.
Okay.
Type of thing. That you can talk about all the stuff you want and what it means, and that's what college is for, is to give you the base knowledge you need to have intelligent conversations on those topics.
Right.
But until you have that base knowledge of fact, you cannot have a logical conversation regarding those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so what would you do if you found yourself in the...
I've been there, yeah.
Okay, let's go to the next slide here. Diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Do you want to talk about this? Because I think we already talked about it.
Well, there's a point I'd like to make on it. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, in short, is the death of everything.
I agree completely.
Do you really want someone cutting your chest open to do open heart surgery because they were hired because of their hairstyle, or because they were hired because they know what's inside there?
Yeah, exactly.
Hairstyle doesn't get my heart working again. And so this is a very important topic, and we see that the worst thing about this is the insidiousness of it. Mm-hmm. Is that if somebody was hired for DEI purposes, first of all, proving that sometimes can be very complex. Mm-hmm. And then when the failure occurs, proving that it was because of the failed hire and not because of other factors can also be complex.
Yeah.
The crash in Toronto comes to mind. With this, they had this special all-female crew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, when people say, "Oh, the woman that was the captain, she had proper credentials." Well, she had proper credentials, but she had bypassed some of the extra hours of training because she had gone to school.
Yeah.
Extra hours, going to school doesn't make up extra hours of flight time.
Right, exactly. I'm a private pilot. I know all about that. Yeah.
I relate it more to running machines in a manufacturing situation.
Yeah.
Okay, when I took over a company, I said, I don't really want to be fully in charge until I know how all the machines work.
Right, yeah.
And so I got a quick education, learned the knowledge of how they work and how they're programmed. Mm-hmm. But I still know damn well that puts me way behind the guy that's been behind that machine for 20 years.
Exactly.
Even
yeah.
if my education taught me things he doesn't know, he instinctively knows those things.
Yeah, exactly.
And so this is where we need to be, is teaching people, the basics and having respect. So, but going back to the whole DEI thing, so now, and there was also some extenuating circumstances, crosswinds, weight, things like that had to do with this. It was a very complex thing when you talk about flying an airplane. So even if that crash was 100% because the woman was not qualified and should not have been flying, especially in that situation with the crosswind, blah, blah, whatever it was, you can't really fully prove it because it was a complex flying situation. Maybe anybody could have crashed in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so DEI not only puts us all at risk, but it creates a situation where you can't even prove that that was the problem.
Right, exactly. And the whole thing is, I mean, let's say DEI, you had a DEI hire, and that was the reason behind it. It's like, look at this. We proved that this DEI hiring policy is the cause of this failure. Great. So what?
Right. Well, so, and bringing this back into the school situation, which I really believe this is an important point here, that if you hire somebody based on DEI in school rather than credentials and experience, right? And so you bring them in, hey, they were the right color. And next thing you know, this person is physically abusing, sexually abusing children in the school. Okay? You can't say it was because of the DEI hire. Well, maybe they just had that psychosis before they ever came here. And somebody that we hired, who had all the experience, they could have had the same psychosis.
Yeah.
Right? But I do believe that if you hire somebody with experience and with background, you at least have those things in front of you to say, well, it's less likely that they're going to be doing that sort of thing. Where somebody with no background and nothing, where you're like, hey, we brought them in because they were the right color, you could get anything.
Yeah. And I don't know about your experience with DEI in the professional environment, but I used to be, when I worked at this company in Austin, Texas, I was on the DEI team. And I was kind of excited about it because this was a whole new idea and everything. I could never get anybody on the DEI team to talk about why this is important. What advantage is this going to provide for the company or for the people that work there? Nobody would ever discuss that. The only thing we wanted to discuss on the team was how to get people to accept it. And for me, it's like, well, you get people to accept it because it makes sense. So you try to figure out a way to make it make sense. They couldn't figure out how to make it make sense. And so that's when I got off the DEI team. And I was like, well, this is a huge waste of time. See, it has to make sense, especially working as an engineer in the engineering field. With other engineers, everything has to make perfect sense. And that's just one of the problems I have with DEI is just it doesn't make any kind of sense to logical, intelligent, thinking, educated people. But anyway, so that's the DEI programs there. We've been here for like an hour and a half, dude, an hour and 40 minutes. Do you want to just give a final thought, or you want to go over this?
I'll touch this real quick because standardized test scores, there's a lot of hubbub about that. When I was a kid, we took those tests. It was kind of stressful, at least for a lot of kids. I was always slightly above my grade level. So it was more annoying to me just to have to go through it. But
I was actually one of those students. I would constantly remind the teacher that D is a passing grade because it does say it says A, B, C, D. D says passing. Oh, you got to pass me.
Right. But the thing is that sure, you can't necessarily hold children to a standardized level. I believe standardized tests are more of a test of the teachers than they are of the children.
And that makes perfect sense.
The teachers and the school district or the educational system.
And that makes perfect sense because, yeah, I mean, it's sort of a
benchmark.
yeah, a sampling or something
Right.
like that. Are the children, can they read better at the 11th grade than they could read at the 10th grade or the 9th grade?
Yeah.
Yeah,
As the
that type of thing,
children
yeah.
go, sure, it can be an extremely helpful tool. The teacher can say, gee, I didn't realize Johnny was having trouble reading. And now I know and I can focus on him and help him with that. So it's good for that. But it should not be any kind of to create a stratus in the children. Stratus of the school system, absolutely. And, this is, I think, where we're going with it wrong is they try to apply it to the children. Now, I looked at standardized schools test scores for Newburgh. Actually, pretty good for the state. But crap as far as the children actually having the skills they should have.
Yeah.
So that tells me that our school system in Oregon, and I blame Oregon, not so much Newburgh, because Newburgh points the finger up, everything they do, right? They told us to do it. Well, I've never been a person that does the wrong thing because I was told to.
Right.
But I understand. They're trying to maintain their funding and keep the kids taught, all that stuff. We got to do what the big boss upstairs says or we lose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And partly that goes back to what I believe is one of the biggest problems we face in this country today is apathy of the citizenry. That, for a long time, people were really concerned and involved in what happened in the way laws were developed, what happened in the way their communities were managed. And then they just kind of started fading away. They got involved in their own lives, which may or may not have been a function of things government did. But the bottom line being that as a result, they were no longer participating in the American government the way it was set up for them to participate. And anytime you set up a system and you fail to use that system the way it was intended, you're headed for straight failure.
And something that you're talking about kind of reminds me of the Milgram experiment, Stanley Milgram and his Milgram experiment. And for those of you who don't understand, this is where an actor was put into a room and they would tell this guy, every time you push this button, it's going to shock the actor. Just keep on upping the voltage until and every time this guy would push the button, the actor would scream. He wasn't actually getting shocked, but they said like 80% of the people would just keep on upping the voltage because somebody told them to do it. And this is a situation, it sounds like what you're talking about here in the school system. There are like 80% of the people who are involved in the school system are just going to keep on upping the voltage because they're told to do that. And it really requires somebody to come in and take accountability of the situation and say, hey, look, what are we actually doing here? Let's retreat. Let's look at the wise mind here. What are we actually doing here? Our purpose for educating these children is to prepare them for life, to prepare them for college, to prepare them for a higher level of existence. Are we actually doing that? And what you're saying is just because the school system is being told to do something in a certain way, that doesn't necessarily mean that makes it an effective school system.
Right. Well, but for me, there's an other side of that. Certainly, that is the description of what is going on for staff. But to me, staff, I don't want to take anything away from them, but in the situation you're describing, they're automatons. Okay? And it's our fault, the citizenry, the people. It's the people's fault that they are automatons.
Right. Good.
That we have decided that we will sit back and we will allow the federal government to tell the state government what our children should learn so that they can tell our teachers what the children should learn, and we sit home and play Monopoly. I don't know what we do. But it should be the other way around, because our government and the way this thing works so that keep us healthy and strong and free forever is to work from the bottom up. That we tell the teachers, we tell the state, we tell the feds what our children should learn, how it should be handled in there, and that is the way it's done.
Yeah.
And so many people have just decided, because they were bullied by people with Yale degrees. Oh, I'm so much smarter than you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, well, I guess you are smarter than me. Why don't you go teach my children so they can be smart too?
Mm-hmm.
And they turn their back and allow whatever to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's not just the school. That's every step of our government, from the city all the way up to the federal government, is being operated this way, and it's really got to stop because this giant monster is going to eat us all.
Right, yeah, yeah. And you're right about that, the whole thing with the schools, the school system. Except one exception to that where it's absolutely true is in Arizona, where I went to Arizona State University. Anybody who went to the University of Arizona, you're essentially, I think you guys would be challenged with any kind of a coloring book. Yeah, so yeah. People who went to the University of Arizona, unlike Arizona State University, people like myself, people who went to the University of Arizona, they have to be reminded that coloring in the pictures is not the same thing as reading the words. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but,
and my example,
yeah.
my example that I have about education today is my brother-in-law, who went and got a degree in technology management.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, he went and got his master's degree.
Okay.
And I think he got an A on his master's thesis.
Okay.
And he was so proud of himself, he showed me his thesis. Before I finished the first paragraph, I'm like, well, that's an F.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Spelling and grammatical errors in a master's thesis in the first paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
I know every teacher I ever had in college would have failed that paper immediately.
Yeah. Yeah.
But nowadays, oh, well, this is the way it goes. Just, spelling, grammar, who cares about that stuff?
Mm, yeah. And you know what? I did have a couple of spelling errors in my master's thesis, and that was loose and lose. I'm looking at this and I'm just reading. Well, the word is spelled correctly, because I did it all in Word.
Just the wrong word.
And Word looks at it and says, yes, it's spelled correctly. Well, the difference between loose and lose, that's it, and loser and like that stuff. Yeah. So, but yeah, I agree with you. Looking at master's theses that were done historically, spelling, grammar, footnotes, everything. I mean, the teacher would look at how it was set up first, and if it wasn't set up correctly, throw it away. Any misspelled word, fail.
Yep.
Like that. And that's, yeah.
I mean, you can get away with that undergrad, but at master's, no way. Or at least you shouldn't, which I believe everybody is nowadays. I mean, I do not have a law degree.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, my father felt it was very important for me to learn the workings of law. And as a result of being involved in real estate since 1990, having worked as a corporate executive and on boards since about 94, I've gotten a lot of experience with law. And I have actually had lawyers call me to attempt to legally bully me, and I shut them down and sent them away, never to call again. These are fresh graduates, don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Just, sorry, buddy, go read a law book and come back and talk to me later.
Yeah, and I had to deal with that stuff whenever the government had this program where new college graduates, corporations were given money to hire new college graduates. These new college graduates would come straight in and it'd be like, I'm here because I'm smarter than everybody else. I'm going to rule this place. And we had to kind of shut them down and discipline them and show, hey, Kay, look, we know more. We have more practical skills than.
But they get all offended and say, but I have a Yale degree. Whatever.
Yeah. Anyways, man, okay, so academic performance scores like this stuff.
Yep.
Let's see. Do I have another?
No, I think,
Ideological. This is something we were talking about. Ideological indoctrination, and this is something you were discussing. Is socialism, communism, and down here, what would you say to parents who are worried that public schools are instilling anti-capitalist, anti-American, or collectivist values in children? That's the fourth one.
I think because of the lack of sterility in the teaching.
Yeah.
I believe it is extremely important to teach various government types, various social structures. But strictly from the point of view is this is what they are. That communism, the theory is a utopian society.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Like I'll tell people the whole thing about communism is it's a beautiful lie. It's a beautiful lie. You know, you never have to pay for anything. You never have to do anything. All you have to do is just just live and exist. Okay, and that's just such BS because somebody is eventually going to have
Right.
to work. Yeah.
However, the bottom line is that's impossible.
Yeah, exactly.
For the one main reason is human nature. Someone will always want more and to be more than someone else. Most people don't want to feel like they're the same as everybody else or that they're lesser than anybody.
Yeah.
And most people want to be something more than
Right.
they are.
Yeah.
It doesn't, they don't have to be more than everybody else. Everybody wants to be more than something they are.
So
It's
how
the
would
human
you
nature
react?
thing.
How would you react if you found out that teachers were teaching in their curriculum anti-American, collectivist, socialist, communist kinds of things? I mean, if it wasn't actually a class on those things.
My reaction would be seek to have them removed as quickly as possible. Of course, that doesn't mean it's possible. It doesn't mean that my word means a damn thing if I said that at the school board. But that would be you asked me my reaction, this is my reaction. But it's important that they teach all that. And I believe, while there was some destruction of it in my school time, I was pretty well taught much of that.
Yeah, yeah.
That, so the other thing about communism, why it can also never truly exist in that utopian thing, is because to reach communism, and even to reach socialism, requires tyranny.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I got my ducks and my corn and all these things I grow, and I want to use that to feed my family. And if I feel especially nice, I might hand some to the family next door so they can have some to feed them too.
That's it.
The goodness of my heart, and this is the way benevolence is really supposed to work on this planet.
Yeah.
So, but now if the government decides we're going to have a social program and these people over in the next town don't have enough and they need it, the government's going to come and take stuff from me to give to them. Well, I didn't want to give that up. I didn't desire to. I was giving up to my neighbor next door and I felt good about that.
Right.
I might have gave to 5 neighbors and I felt good about that, but you want me to give somebody in the next town? I'm not so into that one.
Right.
So now you require to use force or legal actions to force me to participate in your socialism.
Yeah.
And the same thing with communism. If I want to build a business, to build my widgets any way I want, that can't happen under communism.
Right.
The state has to step in and say, we will control your operation, we'll tell you how many widgets to make, and we'll tell you how to make them. So, and we need to explain that to people, that this is how those systems of government work. That, there's other possibilities. There's the extreme sovereign, where the king has full control, which can be okay depending on the king. It may not be bad. And then it's also a very unstable government because somebody always wants to be king and they'll seek to kill the king so they can be king.
Right.
So it's an unstable form of government. And these things need to be pointed out, maybe even not say unstable, but to point out these are the structures. Structures. Go have a philosophical conversation with your buddy about those things. I can't tell you because I'm the teacher.
Yeah.
And so we need to teach the children all these different possibilities. Now, I personally believe if you're properly taught what those different forms of government are and their possibilities and the things that it takes to make those happen, most people will logically come back to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah. And so basically what you're saying is teach these things as facts, philosophies, in a sterile kind of environment. Don't encourage children to live a certain way. Provide the students with facts and information. Allow them to follow their own path. And I think the whole question there was about if a teacher were to require a student to provide some kind of essay or report as to why socialism or communism is a superior government to democracy or a capitalist structure, then that would be wrong. But asking a student, can you describe socialism? Can you describe capitalism? Can you describe free market? Can you describe fascism and so forth? That's teaching a child what it is. But if you have an instructor that's teaching the superiority of socialism over the superiority of free market, I think that's what you're talking about there.
Pretty much. Now, on the teaching side, I see you as absolutely correct. Now, while I see no definite purpose to an assignment that says, tell us if communism is, or capitalism is good or bad, I don't see the purpose under this sterile teaching atmosphere. I don't see it as a completely useless exercise or something that should be outlawed. However, I do believe that if a teacher were to give an assignment saying, tell me what you believe are the downfalls, pitfalls, what's good or bad about this or that type of government, that they could not, to give a grade based on that opinion would be wrong.
Right, exactly.
To give a grade based on whether that opinion actually utilized the information they were taught is correct.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and I think that's what we're getting at there, is that creating a report based on the information you were given, that's one thing. But failing a student because the student does not agree with a teacher's philosophy,
right,
that's a completely different thing.
And in fact, we could say that asking the child to write an essay that explains what they believe are the goods or bads about these things,
right,
that leads to teaching critical thinking.
Exactly, yeah, and that's really, really an important thing there. So let's see what we got left here. Okay, so that's all my slides. That's me. I'm a good-looking guy.
I don't know. Well, okay. Yeah.
So I'm going to get back to this because we've been here for almost 2 hours, man, and I know you got stuff to do. Was there anything else that you wanted to go over? This is, anything else that you wanted to talk about, or we pretty much covered it here?
No, I stand for God, the Constitution, and you.
Hey, man.
And these are the things that all through every aspect of my political life, this is what I do. Some people don't like the term God so much, but I like to turn them back to an essay I did on my website. It's russisforus.com/God. And I purposely use a small g on God for that. Now, God is not small g in my life.
I always capitalize it, yeah.
But for the purposes of this conversation, I felt that was appropriate because I believe God is woven into every aspect of our Constitution and the way it was developed. And it's not, I can tell you for sure, those guys did not agree on God.
Oh, I know they did. Yeah.
But I believe they did agree that a belief in a supreme good deity led to proper moral conscience, which is absolutely necessary in the operation of a government that serves the people.
Right.
And that's where we're at, is that I need to have that moral compass in order to serve you as a political leader.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And people say, oh, I don't want your God in government. You know what? I don't want my God in government either.
Right.
I don't want you to believe in my God. You can, it's fine with me, but I'm not trying to make you do it. That has nothing to do with it. I want you to have moral conscience.
Yeah.
I want people in this country to have a moral conscience and treat each other and this country with the respect they deserve.
So essentially, rest assured that there is a moral compass in what you're doing, and your moral compass rests in your Christian faith and your belief in God, and that you will hold God above everything else: truth, character, dignity, decency. You're not going to require anybody to believe the way you do. You're not going to require anybody to think the way you do. But just understand, you do have a moral compass that comes from your faith in God and your belief in religion.
Right. It's to go back to, I would never try to force a class teaching people to be Christian in school. You teach them about Christianity. I took a class on the world's religions in college. We covered the big ones. I don't think we got to all of them, but we covered the big ones.
Did you cover the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster?
No, they
That's
left that
a
one
big
out.
one right there, man.
It is. I've learned about it in years past since then, and it's a very significant church for people. But the bottom line being that learning those things is good because it also helps you understand where people come from
Yeah.
and how society developed. And so those are important things. But yeah, and I would never try to create a rule in school board or a law in Congress that was specifically related to my religion, right? But I am not afraid to say, well, the moral character I have developed through my religion says we should not kill people, so we should create a law against that.
Okay. Yeah.
If you agree with me, then we can do that. If it's strictly me yelling that in an empty room, it's not going to happen, and I'm not going to try to force it, because this government is about the people.
Right.
You know, it's like on my page on my website, russisforus.com/together. And this isn't the woke thing together. This is, I need us to work together to get me elected so that we together can bring this country back to what it should be and to the places we want it to go.
Yep. Sounds good, man.
It was all designed for us to do this together, not alone.
Yep. Yep. All right, man. All right. Well, tell you what, we've got about 2 hours going on here.
All right. I appreciate your time.
You want to just cut it out then?
Yeah, I've done this and that and spoke a
All
lot.
right.
I did a little closing thing. I appreciate your time, Tom. It's been great.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, and everybody. This is David Russ, Oregon District 6 in 2026 school board person, and you can reach him at russisforus.com. And this is the guy. And it really sounds like we had a really good discussion here. Thank you very much for coming on.
I appreciate it anytime, Tom.
Okay. Well, all right. Thank you very much for coming in, and have a good day.